The protests are being led by young people, often labeled as Gen Z in Nepal. They erupted pretty quickly in early September 2025, after the government decided to ban access to many major social media platforms. But honestly, the protests haven't stayed limited to just social media access. They're also about bigger issues like corruption, inequality, political instability, youth unemployment, mistrust in institutions, nepotism, and more. What really sent things over the edge was the social media ban. On September 4th, 2025, the Nepal government under Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli issued directives that required both foreign and domestic social media platforms to register with the Ministry of Communication and Information Technology, or MOSIAT, due to concerns over fake identities, misinformation, and cybercrime. When a lot of the major platforms, like Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, YouTube, X, and so on, didn't comply with the deadline, they were blocked. The move was seen as perceived censorship and restriction of freedoms. Young people saw this not just as some regulatory step, but as an attack on freedom of expression, digital connectivity, and really as a tool to suppress criticism. For a lot of folks in Gen Z, social media isn't just about leisure. It's how they learn, communicate, organize, find jobs, and stay in touch. Losing access was honestly a really strong blow. So the ban struck a nerve. It was like the spark in an environment already heavy with frustration. While the social media ban was the spark, the protests, well, they reflect deeper grievances. Here are the main drivers. Corruption and lack of accountability. There's this widespread perception that corruption is, endemic among politicians and in state institutions. Important scandals like the Airbus deal back in 2017 involving Nepal Airlines and the losses to the exchequer haven't really had satisfying resolutions for many folks. Politicians' misconduct often gets exposed via social media or leaked, but little seems to change. Cases like embezzlement, misuse of public funds, and so on feed into a narrative that, well, elites benefit while ordinary citizens struggle. So, let's talk about nepotism, inequality, and the whole Nepo kid or Nepo babies phenomenon. It's been a trending theme online lately. Children or relatives of politicians, often referred to as Nepo kids, living these incredibly privileged lives. They're studying abroad, flaunting luxury, all while many others in Gen Z are struggling. The contrast is, well, stark, and it's seen as a symbol of inequality and the misuse of privilege. Moving on to economic pressures, unemployment, and migration. Many young Nepalese, unfortunately, lack good job opportunities at home, so large numbers of them seek work abroad. Inflation and the rising cost of living are real issues, and inadequate services like education, healthcare, and infrastructure also weigh heavily on people. Now, let's delve into political instability, weak institutions, and broken promises. Since the end of the monarchy in 2008, Nepal has seen a lot of governments come and go. Many administrations don't even complete their full terms, and trust in political parties and institutions has really eroded. Young people understandably feel disillusioned, as promises of reforms, accountability, and development are repeatedly unmet. So, when we talk about generational expectations and digital connectedness, Gen Z really stands out. They've grown up with digital access, constant exposure to global standards, social media, and pretty much all the information they could want at their fingertips. This means they're always comparing their situation to peers in other countries, seeing what's possible elsewhere. That, of course, raises their expectations. Plus, they now have the tools, like the internet and social media, to organize, share dissent, and create narratives that challenge the official ones. Here's how things shifted step by step, from a single trigger to broad protest, and then even to violence and political change. After the ban, youth and students mobilized online, using posts and hashtags that were critical of government actions. The Nepo kids narrative really got traction. Then, Out on the streets, there were large gatherings near parliamentary areas, like in Kathmandu and other places, along with symbolic acts like marches and placards. The government responded with curfews, barricades, deployment of security forces, and even the use of tear gas and rubber bullets. Tragically, deaths did occur. At least 19 people died in the early clashes, and many more were injured. The protests quickly spread beyond Kathmandu to many towns and districts. Curfews were extended beyond the capital as well. With the government under real pressure, they ended up lifting the social media ban. Also, a few ministers actually resigned. Some features that made this generation especially likely to lead or drive these protests? Well, they're digital natives. Social media is integral, not just for entertainment, but also for education, social organizing, and, even identity formation. The platforms that were taken away were part of their daily lives. Higher expectations of transparency, justice, and fairness. Access to information makes corruption harder to hide, and people now compare with other countries. Disillusionment comes from seeing repeated patterns of political dysfunction, elites handling public resources without accountability, and even when scandals are exposed, well, there's little change. Youthful energy and urgency are really at the heart of this movement. Many feel that if change doesn't happen now, things might just, get even worse. There's this strong feeling that they simply can't wait any longer. And honestly, some are just not satisfied with incremental reforms anymore. The government actually lifted the social media ban shortly after the protests began. And, certain ministers, like the Home Affairs Minister, have resigned, partly in response to protester demands and all that public pressure. These protests have exposed some pretty deep fissures. Trust in institutions is low, and there's this growing political risk in ignoring youth dissatisfaction. Violence has, unfortunately, become part of the escalation. Clashes with security forces, property destruction, and even deaths and injuries. Regretfully, these are some of the harsh realities faced on the streets. There's a growing polarization, with really differing views among political parties about what these protests actually mean and, who is really leading them. Some people even accuse so-called deep state influences, or say there might be interference from external actors. There's definitely a potential for backlash here. Restrictions could return, and repression of dissent could really increase. The government may even try to tighten its control over digital spaces. Digital freedoms are quickly becoming central to political and civic life, especially for younger generations. And honestly, any attempts to limit or control those freedoms tend to provoke some pretty strong pushback. Corruption isn't just some abstract concern. When people actually experience the personal cost, like the lack of basic services, growing inequality, having to work abroad, or just plain economic hardship, those scandals start to feel like real moral failures and honestly a deep sense of betrayal. Youth are definitely not passive. With digital tools at their fingertips, they can organize incredibly fast, spread awareness, mobilize, and even influence political outcomes in ways that just weren't possible before. Institutional weakness and political instability are, really costly. When governments don't respond to public concerns, especially those coming from younger generations, they risk sparking large-scale unrest.